I was the most cold-blooded killer in the world. I could feel no remorse, no pity, no sadness. Hi, my name is Author. I'm the author of 13 books, including the latest, The Shadow of the Smile, the true story of Ted Bundy. And today I'm here to talk about Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was an American serial killer who kidnapped, raped, murdered young women in the 1970s. His crimes spanned from California all the way up to Washington state, and he would often target women who were at college campuses. He was also a handsome man, charismatic, good-looking, and so he was able to get very close to his victims before their deaths. He was known for being polite, even chivalrous, which is why many of his victims trusted him, even though they should have been afraid because of his demeanor. They felt safe around him. And what made him such a monster was that after he killed them, he would actually return to the crime scene, which is how some of the bodies were found. But he would actually take trophies from these murdered women, photographs of them, sometimes their clothes. He had a box full of these items that he would keep in his apartment. He called it his private collection. In 1976, Ted Bundy was finally caught, and then he confessed to 30 murders. However, it's suspected that he may have actually killed as many as 100 women. He was convicted in 1978 and was given 4 consecutive life sentences, and only 7 years later, in January of 1989, he was executed in Florida's electric chair. Ted Bundy's story has fascinated people for decades now. What was it about this man that led him to murder so many women? What was it about the psyche of Ted Bundy that made him such a monster? Well, I explore that in my book, and I look at those questions through the lens of one woman who knew Ted Bundy better than anyone else. His longtime girlfriend, Elizabeth Klepp. Elizabeth and Ted met in the summer of 1961. She was just 16 and he was 20. But they bonded over their love of classical music and literature, and although their relationship wasn't always smooth sailing, they did end up together in the early 1970s, and so she was with him when he committed the murders, but she didn't know it. When I started researching Ted Bundy, Elizabeth Klepfer's story stood out to me the most. It was her story that answered the question of who was Ted Bundy, not the monster, but the man, the person, who had been loved by someone who had friends, who had family, who had interests, hobbies, dreams for the future, who went to school, got good grades, who seemed like he was going places, a seemingly ordinary guy who did extraordinary things. It was Elizabeth's story that gave me insight into the man behind the headlines. Elizabeth had never spoken publicly about her relationship with Ted until just recently, and so I flew out to Salt Lake City where she lives, and I interviewed her. She is now in her 70s. She's retired, and we talked for hours about her relationship with Ted, how it began, how it ended, what it was like. What I learned from her is that there are 2 sides to every story, and in Ted Bundy's case, the public only knows one side. We know about the brutality, the evil, the creepiness, but we don't know about the Ted that Elizabeth fell in love with. The man who cooked her breakfast in bed, who brought her flowers, who told her she was beautiful, who wanted a future with her, who took care of her dog when she was sick, who cried when her father died. Because Elizabeth saw the best of Ted, she didn't see the worst of Ted. Now, does that make her story any less horrifying? No. She knew a monster without knowing that he was a monster. And it was only after he was arrested that she learned that he had been leading a double life. Ted Bundy was arrested in August of 1975. A week prior to that, he had been stopped by police in Colorado for a routine traffic violation. But when the officer walked up to his Volkswagen Beetle, he noticed that there was blood on the gear shift and the door handle. When he looked inside the car, he saw a bloody meat cleaver in the back seat. So he naturally became suspicious, and he ended up finding a young girl who had been hiking in the area. She had been missing. Her name was Karen Campbell, and she told the officer that Ted Bundy had attacked her, had hit her over the head with a tire iron, and left her for dead. He had actually intended to kill her, but she survived. A few days later, Ted Bundy was pulled over again for another traffic violation, this time in Utah. And when police searched his car, they found women's clothing in the back seat, as well as handcuffs and a ski mask. At that point, they knew they had a predator on their hands. And then soon after, Ted Bundy became the prime suspect in several other cases. But when police searched his apartment, they didn't find any evidence. They didn't find any remains. And so, they let him go. However, 1 month later, Ted Bundy drove his Volkswagen Beetle to Seattle, Washington. And it was there that he would kidnap, rape, and murder a 19-year-old woman named Susan Elaine Ross. Her body was found on a Monday morning at the University of Washington. She had been strangled with a belt, and what happened next was very important. As I mentioned earlier, Ted Bundy returned to the scene of his crimes, the places where he had killed, and he did that because he wanted more evidence. He wanted more clues so that the police wouldn't catch him. However, in this case, he had been spotted by a witness who remembered the license plate number of the Volkswagen Beetle that had been parked near where Susanna's body was found. The police ran the license plate number and they came up with Ted Bundy's name. He was tracked down at his home in Seattle. He was arrested. He was taken down to the station house, and when he walked through the door, there was an officer sitting behind the desk. That officer's name was Bob Haywood. He was the same officer who had pulled Ted Bundy over for that traffic violation in Colorado a year earlier. He was the one who had seen the blood in the car, the meat cleaver, but he didn't put the two together. He didn't realize that the man he was looking at now was the same man he had let go a year ago. Ted Bundy tried to convince Bob that he wasn't involved in the murders, that he hadn't done anything wrong, but Bob wasn't convinced. In fact, he was sure that Ted was guilty, and so he began questioning him. At first, Ted denied everything, but then he started to confess, and by the end of the day, he had admitted to killing 12 women. When Elizabeth heard that Ted had been arrested, she was shocked. She couldn't believe that the man she loved was a murderer, and yet she should have seen the signs. There were so many red flags. Ted had been arrested several times for burglary and theft. He had been accused of assaulting women. There were several women out there who claimed that Ted had attacked them. And Ted had also told Elizabeth that he had killed someone. He said that he had killed a woman, but he had done it in And so, as shocking as it was to learn that Ted Bundy was a brutal, remorseless killer, it really shouldn't have come as a surprise to Elizabeth. But the most disturbing thing was yet to come. Ted Bundy escaped from prison twice. The first time was in June of 1977. He fooled everyone. He made a replica of his cell, and he used that replica to escape. And he stayed on the run for 6 months until he was captured in Florida. And that brings me to the second reason that Ted Bundy's story continues to fascinate people. Not only is it the brutality of his crimes, but also the fact that he escaped twice, that he outsmarted the prison officials, that he was able to fool everyone. In February of 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida State Prison. He chose to be killed in the electric chair rather than by lethal injection. And this is what he said as the lethal switch was flipped. "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends. I'd like to say I'm sorry for the pain that my trial and execution caused them. In the beginning, my attorneys told me I was looking at the possibility of life imprisonment. I was very pleased. But as time went on, I began to realize that my friends and family were going to have to suffer, too. I didn't want that. To those few that have maintained their belief in me, I can only say, I'm sorry. To my family and friends, please know that I love you, and I've thought of you often. Although I have been portrayed as a monster, it is to you that I have always turned for my definition of what a human being is. It is from you that I have received the values and goals which have always guided me. I must take full responsibility for my actions. Yet I was always basically a good, sober, moral, prudent person. My behavior prior to my arrest was not a continuous pattern, but rather an intermittent one. And I truly believe I could have gone the rest of my life without again committing any criminal offenses. Finally, to those who have supported me all these years, please don't waste any tears on me. Deep down, I don't think I can ever die. I was the most cold-blooded killer in the world. I could feel no remorse, no pity, no sadness. Death is the ultimate journey, and I will be allowed to start a new life in another place. Thank you for watching this video.